This weekend, calling it the kickoff of awards season. There have been plenty of films that have already come out that are certainly wanting to contend for awards, but I think we're going to start to see really like the true wave of attempted award contenders starting now. And we are actually going to start with First Man, which comes from Damien Chazelle, who did La La Land, which won awards for sure, and lost one award, which was a dramatic moment at the Oscars, which I took a great pleasure in, because unfortunately I thought that La La Land was really overhyped. By the time I saw it, I had been so amped up, and I think part of it was I tend to run in creative circles and talk to people who kind of want to live out that wish fulfillment that is portrayed in La La Land, and so I think they really got an extra level of enjoyment out of it. And so by the time I got to see it, I was like, this better be the greatest film that's ever been, because everyone's talking about it like it's the second coming of, cinema itself, and I don't think it lived up to that. But I think that it was speaking to a certain type of person and dreamers and all that sort of thing. But anyway, Damien Chazelle is reuniting with La La Land star Ryan Gosling, and he is playing real-life astronaut Neil Armstrong. It's interesting because they choose not to portray Neil Armstrong as a, perfect, heroic, unflawed character. He has flaws. He's a family man. That's definitely a big part of the narrative of this. It's a lot about him dealing with his family and those interpersonal relationships, and I know it's very easy with, this is not new territory, right? We have tread over the moon landing many, many times in cinema. And this is trying not so much to focus on the kind of spectacle of NASA and the space race. But I think in terms of that, we have to look to something like Hidden Figures from last year, which did, I think, a better job, honestly, of portraying the drama involved, the personal stakes involved, the struggle, the sacrifice, how it impacts your family life. And, Neil Armstrong in this is not a particularly relatable character. And the problem is in this, none of the characters felt particularly relatable. I think the closest you get is Claire Foy, who plays Janet Armstrong, Neil Armstrong's wife, who is basically the long-suffering wife of Neil Armstrong, who is supportive but frustrated, and understandably so very much. And Claire Foy is great in this, and I think she's a fantastic actress, but it's tough when you don't have someone, you're rooting for them, but you also know how it ends. And so watching them go through these struggles, I don't think the challenges along the way really emotionally resonated in the way that the filmmakers wanted to. You've got a supporting cast of people like Jason Clarke, Kyle Chandler, Corey Stoll, Cirian Hinds, Patrick Fugit, Ethan Embry, Pablo Schreiber. It's a strong, strong list of supporting characters. But the other problem is you're not really giving us a lot of time to get to know these characters. Some of them you kind of know because they are historical figures. Like Corey Stoll is playing Buzz Aldrin, which I think is actually an interesting choice, because Buzz Aldrin has a full head of hair still to this day. Met him a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, and he did well coiffed, and Corey Stoll is follically challenged, but it's a movie, I get it. But even Buzz Aldrin in this is not the most likable character. And so I appreciate that they are not trying to sugarcoat history. That I give them credit for. However, the movie is very long, very, very long, almost 2.5 hours long. I think it could have used another editing pass. I know people have been talking about seeing it in IMAX and how that changes the experience a little bit. And I will say the sound design for this movie is spectacular. Even seeing it in a regular movie theater, I was like, oh, okay. I appreciate when a director knows how to use silence, and Damien Chazelle certainly knew how to use silence in this. But sound design does not make a whole movie. So I wanted more out of the performances. I wanted more out of the characters. I wanted more out of the plot, and I also wanted less out of the plot because I wanted it to be shorter. Overall, I think it's another one that's going to get overhyped. I know there's a lot of goodwill towards both of them, and it's not a bad movie. Don't get me wrong. It was fine, but it really could have used another editing pass. So I am going to give it 3.5 out of 5, and I get the sense that I'm probably going to be on the lower end of the rating scale for this, but I also am we shouldn't be giving a pass to a filmmaker just because their last movie was well liked, right? You are judged by the content that you were putting out here now, and I think he was also probably given a lot of free reign because of the success of the last one, and it doesn't quite live up to that. So 3.5 out of 5 for First Man. The next one I've got is not going to be an awards contender, and I think they know that, but it's, it was an interesting movie. So it's Bad Times at the El Royale, and it stars Jeff Bridges, Cynthia Ervio, Dakota Johnson, John Hamm, Nick Offerman, and Chris Hemsworth. And, this is an interesting one. It's from director Drew Goddard, who did Cabin in the Woods and was also heavily involved in Lost, and I loved Lost, absolutely loved Lost. And so there are weird storytelling elements that I actually think kind of relate to Lost in that you're seeing a lot of parallel storylines happening at the same time, and they do all interconnect. But the thing is, this is another movie where I was like, you know what? It probably could have used another editing pass, in that, you know, you're retreading territory over and over again because you're seeing the story from multiple character perspectives, and it doesn't necessarily bring as much new to each time you see it through, or each time you see a different thing that's happening at the same time that I would want. And so I was like, okay, this is another one where I was like, you know, the fact that we've retread this could have used another editing pass. This is another one that's almost 2 hours and 20 minutes. And I'm just like, hey, look, there are a lot of movies coming out right now. Like, unless you really use every second of those minutes well, I need you all to cut things down a little bit more. It's a little self-indulgent, to be honest. I think Jeff Bridges is fascinating in it. I don't want to go too much into the plot because I do think that was some of the fun of it, was just kind of like piecing together the mystery and all that, you know, fun jazz. I will say that Chris Hemsworth, and this has kind of been spoiled in the trailers, plays this very kind of alluring cult-ish leader. And, you know, there are all these gifs of him, like, doesn't wear a shirt in it. God bless whoever cast that for whatever reason. Like, I was like, all right, yeah, you know what? I probably am pretty sure there are people who would follow Chris Hemsworth if he started a cult to their end of days. And I get it. He is charismatic and he is charming. So I'm going to caveat it. You know, it was fine. It was a nice change. I've been seeing a lot of Oscar bait-y movies recently, and so it was a nice change from that. The plot was not unoriginal. It wasn't the most original thing ever, but I did enjoy it. And I just wish that it had been a little bit tighter and they'd really thought about, like, okay, what do we really need to retread in order? Like, trust your audience, right? Trust your audience to pick things up. So Bad Times at the El Royale, you know, it might be worth checking out if you've seen everything already and, you know, you want a slightly lighter but serious fare, if that makes sense. I'm going to give it 3 out of 5. Finally, I have The Happy Prince, which comes from Rupert Everett, who I think almost everyone probably knows, or if you know who he is, he's an actor, but he writes, directs, and stars in this, and he stars as Oscar Wilde in the latter days of Oscar Wilde's life. So if you aren't familiar with, Oscar Wilde was actually imprisoned for being a homosexual in England. You know, different time, but scarily not different enough. And this deals with the sort of chapter of his life after that imprisonment, after that sort of fall from grace. What does he do with his life then? It's not the prettiest picture. It's not a linear story. It's also in multiple languages, which generally speaking, I don't have any problem with, but because the story itself is a little bit muddled, it doesn't help. I absolutely adore the Stephen Fry version of Oscar Wilde from a while back, I think it's called Wilde. And I don't know if Rupert Everett brings the same sort of charm and appeal that you want in an Oscar Wilde character. Like, obviously this character is smarter than everyone else around him, but you need your audience to connect to them and not to be alienated by that. And I don't know if this portrayal of Oscar Wilde achieves that. It does have a very strong supporting cast. You know, Colin Firth plays Reggie Turner, who's a friend of Wilde. Colin Morgan plays Alfred Bosey Douglas. Emily Watson plays Constance Wilde, his wife. Yes, Oscar Wilde had a wife. Tom Wilkinson plays another character. You know, it's just interesting. Like, I feel like also there are, you know, X number of British actors who are just kind of required to be in each other's pictures throughout the year. You know, you want to give him points for trying. Like, you can tell that this was a labor of love from Rupert Everett, but that does not an amazing movie make. If you are a huge Oscar Wilde fan, maybe you'll appreciate that. There are a lot of themes that I think are applicable to today. You know, there's a lot of stuff about LGBTQ rights and the lack thereof. That part of Wilde's story and history is certainly an interesting one, but I don't know if this film does enough to dig into that. So Happy Prince, you know, it's not going to be a widespread movie. I think it might be a renter, if anything. If you're a history buff, if you're a theater buff, if you're a literature buff, you know, you could check it out. So I'm going to give it 2.5 out of 5.